Okay, so let's see the app we are going to develop in this lesson. So in this lesson, you will develop an app which is compatible across multiple devices. This is a continuation of the previous lesson. So when you got multiple components like this, in this lesson we will discuss about how to use advanced constraint layout options, and especially to use horizontal alignments and how to align horizontally and vertically, also how to use baseline constraints, and then also you will learn how to use the property palette to do this app, and then you will also learn about what are the limitations of this, and then what are the next steps. So this is a very important lesson because this covers adaptive user interface and device compatibility, and you need to know this practical knowledge if you are to develop an app for a client or for a customer, if you are to secure a job in the industry as an Android developer. So let's go and discuss about this practically, and also we will be talking about some important advanced concepts inside this lesson. So let's go and do this practical now. Hi everybody, welcome to the lesson Android Screen Compatibility, Support Different Screen Sizes, Part 2, Flexible Layouts, Continuation. So this is Part 2 of supporting different screen sizes using flexible layouts, and we are continuing that flexible layouts lesson. Overall, it's about achieving screen compatibility. We'll be using these tools for this lecture, and make sure to finish these prerequisites before you start this lecture. And because this is part 2, definitely you had to look at part 1 before this. So in this session, you will continue to learn about screen compatibility and supporting different screen sizes using flexible layouts. So in the previous part 1, you learn about flexible layouts and using constraint layouts. So in this, you will learn further more about constraint layout and then avoiding hard coding layout sizes. So we after initially we will discuss a little bit more about constraint layouts, then we will go into discussing how to avoid hard coding the layouts, and these points we explained in the previous part 1 as well. As usual, we will be doing practical demonstrations. So now let's go and discuss this practically. So this is the practical we started in the previous part 1, and we have given we added the components and added constraint layout. So if you look at the XML coding, you can see it's a constraint layout, and we have constrained uh, the components to each other. One thing very important as a revision is when you have components like this, the top, the ones at the top, the one at the top, you will constrain it to the parent window, but the ones after that, okay, towards left hand side you will constrain it towards the parent window, but the top the vertical constraint you will constrain it to the nearest component. You don't constrain it to the top of the window. And then this one also same, you have constrained the left, and here there's something special. When you have a line like this, let's say a label, and in front of that if you have a text box, rather than constraining the text box, the vertical constraint, rather than constrain the vertical constraint, rather than constraining it to the component above, you can constrain it to the baseline of the component left to you. That we did this in the previous lesson. Have a look at it. And then this button towards the left, and then towards the component, constrain it to towards the vertical one. Same for the image. Now the advantage of this is when you do like this, and let's say if you move this top component down, if you do it like this, then the whole layout will move, right? So let's say then if you, for example, if you look once again, if you move the top label only, then the whole thing moves. So you are moving only one, then everything moves. So that is one advantage of doing it this way. Also, when it runs on different screen sizes, it will grow and shrink as a whole, right? So those are the basic things we discussed, and this was just a quick revision to the previous lesson as well, what I did now. So if we further read about developer docs, building a responsive UI with constraint layout, so there are some guidelines which we discussed this in the previous lesson. Sometimes you will have to add these state lines into your Gradle build scripts whenever you want to use constraint layout, but if you are using a new Android Studio version, you don't have to do it. Constraint layout is enabled by default. Then if you are having a different layout, let's say a linear layout or some other layout, you can convert that into a constraint layout. You can just right click on the component tree, you can right click on the layout and then say convert the if it's a linear layout, convert it to constraint layout. So that is possible. So but in this case, if you look at your component tree, it is a constraint layout. Look at my mouse. But if this was a different layout, then you can just right click here and say convert to in this case it doesn't say constraint layout, but if this was a linear layout, it will say convert to linear layout. So just click it and then it converts your layout into a linear layout. But then after that you will have to add the constraints for individual components. That is that you can convert a layout or you can create a new layout. Also you can once you do that, you can add or remove constraints. Once you add the constraints, you can add or remove them. So if you add a constraint and if you think you add it by mistake, you can just click on that constraint, then it selects it, and then you can just use the delete key from the keyboard and click and delete, right? So then the constraint is deleted, but then it will not align as you wish, right? So I will undo this, but if you want, you can delete the constraint. So I put it back. Also, you can right click on a component and say clear constraints. Then it will clear all the constraints of this button. If you say clear, then it clears. So let's say if you add this, if you have added, okay, I have added 3 constraints for the image, left and the right and the top. So if you want, you can right click and say clear constraint. It will clear all the constraints. As you see now, it's not constrained. So if you run this now, the image will not be in the right position. So now you can see in the when you run on the emulator, the image is not in the right position, but the image will stay in that position in the design, but not in the runtime. So that is because I clear the constraints. But if I undo this, I can just click and say Control Z, and it undo like undo what the task. And now if you run, because the constraints are added, now the image will be coming back. So it was just to explain you about how to clear the constraints, right? You can add or remove constraints. You can also do a lot of changes from the property palette. So if you have constraints, you can see these constraints are displayed in the property palette. So if I click on the button, you can see because we have added a left constraint and a top. You can see in the property palette, if you look at my mouse, the left constraint value is given. So if you want, you can change this value. Let's say, for example, if you click on the label, it's 32, right, from the left. So then if you think you want the button also to come in the same alignment, you can go to the property palette and put the same value as I'm doing now, 32. So then it will change likewise, right? So you can change these constraints from the property palette as well, right? So you can use the property palette for that. So if you got, let's say, the first component, as I said, whatever it is, always you can constrain it to the, let's say, the parent window. Let's say if you got 3 components, A, B, and C, A is the first one. So you constrain that to the parent window like we did. and the other components you can constrain it to, let's say, A, component A. So just to maintain the order, right? So for example, for component C, you add a vertical constraint to A, and for component B, you add a horizontal constraint. So the idea here is you will try to constrain it, constrain the first one to the parent and the other components to that particular component. Then you can align the components. So alignment. So if I show it to you in the same earlier practical. So I'm going to add another label. Let's say because I want to get the same look and feel, I will just copy this from the keyboard. I will press Ctrl C from the keyboard and then press Ctrl V. So then if I move it, so I got the second I pasted the second component, but then it comes with constraints. But as you can see, then that is also constrained to the, like the earlier label. This one I copied and pasted now is also constrained to the top label, but that is not what I want. The second label should be constrained to the nearest neighbor. So, and this left one, left constraint, according to this, you can constrain it, you can have a horizontal alignment, right? Instead of constraining the second one to the parent window, second one means B, you can constrain it to A. So what you do is you can right click on this and say clear constraints, and then let's say you move it slightly this side, and then let's say you want to call it as employee name. Let's change the label. Now then when you constrain this, what you can do is you click on this, and instead of constraining this to the left of the parent, you can just click this circle and take it like this, and then constrain it to the first label towards left. So then it will maintain that alignment, horizontal alignment, and then you can constrain this to the label. So just to maintain that vertical alignment, right? Just to maintain that vertical alignment. And then let's say if I copy Control C this text box and paste it, Control V, then if I move that text box, right? So if I it's not allowing me to bring it down because of it's having a baseline constraint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this and say clear constraint. So then it will allow me to move it, right? So when I clear the constraint, then only it allowed me to move it. Then the first one, the constraints are there. So this one, then what I do is you can constrain this left into the left of this text box. So then it will maintain that alignment. Let's say the horizontal alignment. It will maintain that. So now what we did a little while ago is we just copied this text box and we added constraints, but we add only one constraint towards the left. So then when you run it, the second text box is at the top because you didn't give a vertical constraint. So the vertical constraint, if you want, as I said in the previous lecture, if you want in a situation like this where you got a row, you can right click on this and say show baseline, and then you can drag this baseline into the baseline of this. So those comes like at the same level, the text comes at the same level. So now if you run, you will see the components are aligned. So this is how you use the constraint layout, right? Now let's further look. So this is about alignment. Then the base alignment, like I discussed now. Then you can constrain to a guideline, constrain to a barrier. So you can read these. You can adjust the constraint bias. These are like more and more customizations. You can adjust the view size, etc. You can set them as ratios, right? Likewise, so these are extra readings, and also you can automatically create constraints. So you can, instead of doing it manually, you can put all your components, and then you can click on infer constraints on this icon, and then Android Studio will create the constraints automatically, and it will try to apply the best constraints instead of you doing. Then also there are techniques called keyframe animations, etc. About more and more about constraint layouts. So that was the end of that developer docs section, and with that you got more in-depth idea about how to use constraint layout. And when you apply these techniques, it makes your app compatible across screens, but still you have to add more techniques. But this is the starting point for you to make apps. For you to make one app which is compatible across multiple screens. So now when you run it on multiple devices, the same app, you can see it maintains that horizontal alignments of the label, and the vertical alignments and the baselines, and the image is centered because you centered it with the constraint layout, and the heading as well. But when you look at these two, there are certain changes you will prefer to have, such as you will prefer a larger font size for the heading in the tab, and maybe uh, let's say the text box and the labels are just more towards left side in the tab. You would prefer them to be in the center. So those things we will be discussing in the next few lessons, right? So how to improve this, right? That we discuss immediately after this lesson. For that, we will be applying a technique called providing alternative layouts. With alternative layouts, we can do all that. And then also, let's say when the app is running on the mobile, and if the user rotates the phone, what happens now is you will see only part of the app. You don't see the button properly, etc., and the image. So those things we have to solve, right? But once again, if I put it back, you will see. So that means just doing this basic constraint layout, meaning flexible layout, does not solve all the problems, but this solves for the initial problems, and this solves a lot, but you have to do more. So that's what I'm explaining to you now at this moment. So you have to add more techniques to make it a complete app. For example, when you make it rotate, it's the landscape mode. So for that, you can provide an alternative layout. We can provide for landscape orientation, and if we provide it, then the runtime will automatically load it and display it. So those things we are doing immediately after this lesson with more practicals. So keep in mind, this is a very important lesson what you are doing now. This is in generally known as device compatibility or adaptive user interface, because when you are developing a mobile app, if you just develop it without considering this, and as you can see, if the user rotates the phone, the user will not get the best experience of the app. So that means when it comes to developing app, it's not only developing the app. It's after developing the app, it is also about applying adaptive user interface techniques, or in other words, device compatibility techniques, and then you have to make sure the app works well in different devices and different configurations. So that is what we are discussing in the next few lessons. So the conclusion is, once again, you improved your knowledge about screen compatibility, and you learn more about constraint layouts. Avoiding hard-coded layouts will be discussed in the next practical soon after this. References for Android developer docs, and make sure to have a look at the next lessons to complete this. We are very excited to see you in the next lesson, and see you all in the next lesson.